Hi guys, in this video we're just going to have a quick run through or a refresh of how to display numerical data. So just the first section of 1C. Okay, so when we're looking at numerical data, remember you have two types. You have discrete data where you've counted the responses, and you have continuous data where you have measured. So because we have different types of numerical data, we also show or represent them slightly differently in frequency tables. So what you might remember, you've got really basic frequency tables where you've just got some numbers listed and a simple count. So much like what we had for the categorical data. But then if you've got a lot of data or really spread out data, you look at grouping it. And so that's what we're looking at here. The key thing to remember too, though, is that for continuous data, you always have to group it. So it's unlikely you would have to do this in an exam setting, but it's just to make sure that you have an idea of how to do this if you needed to. Okay, so looking at our two examples here, we want to aim to break up the data into some even groups. Okay, you want usually between 5 to 10 or 15 groups, but I think 5 to 10 is a good number. And so what you want to be looking at, what you want to be thinking is, do I have discrete data or do I have continuous? That's the first thing. If it's discrete, I can give just sort of those overarching intervals like this. So there can be a gap, that's okay. Okay. When it's continuous though, we have to think about the fact that something could be 14.9, or it could be 14.99, or it could be 14.99999. So at what point does it go into one group or the next? And so it's just using these less than symbols. Okay, so we'll explain that in the example. So when I need to split this data up into two groups, into the intervals, if I look at example A with the batting scores over a previous cricket season, what I want you to think, okay, so what you're going to write down before you do the work, or at least what you're going to think, okay, what's my maximum, what's my minimum, and what's the range of that data? Okay, so remember your maximum is your highest. So if we're looking here, I can see I've got a value of 111. So I need to fit that in at the top end of my data, of my intervals. What's my minimum? Okay, my minimum here I can see is 70. So I don't have to go any lower than that. And the reason I think about the range, so here the range, remember, is your maximum minus your minimum number. And so my range here is 41. So if I want to break that up into even intervals, I can look at that and go, okay, I've got a range a bit over 40. So if I go up by tens, that will give me just tick over into 5 intervals. And that's a good size. Okay, if I went in up by groups of 5, that could also work. All right. So now I need to start at 70 because that's my lowest number. So I need to make sure I've included that. So if I start at 70 as my first interval, I'm going to go in tens. So I'm going to go up to 79, which means my next interval would start at 80, then 90, and so on. So you can see I'm keeping track of keeping them as evenly spaced intervals by counting up in tens as the first point. Okay, so I still need to go 100 to 109. 110 to 119. Okay, so I had to go all the way up to 119, even though my maximum was 111, because I want all of those intervals to be exactly the same size. So whatever size I've decided, I continue that the whole time. I don't chop and change to suit the data. Okay, so I decide on something and I stick with it. Here you'll notice, so we have discrete values. So I could stop at 79 and then start the next one at 80. Because I do not have anyone that could get 79.6. Not possible. It's going to be a discrete, so it's going to be a whole number. With example B, though, when we look at the heights of these 17 people, at the moment they've been given to 1 decimal place, but that has just been rounded off. So what we want to do for continuous data is, like we've set up here, is to use this less than symbol. Okay, so before I do that, I'm going to think, what is my max? What is my min? And what is my range? So what am I working within? So here, if I check this all very, very carefully, and there's lots of numbers there, my maximum, I've got 188.7. My minimum, 154.4. So I have to make sure I start down below this, and I have to make sure I finish above 188.7. My range there, when I subtract my maximum minus my minimum, I get 33.8. So 35 to 40, we think 40. Okay, so I now have decided this time I'm going to do groups of 5. And in order to capture my minimum, I'm going to start at 150. Okay, my next interval will start at 155, 160, 165, and so on. When I go to put in the upper end, so where does this first interval for 150 stop? Well, it stops at the biggest number possible, less than 155, which is not 154 this time because we've got decimals. So what we actually do is say, well, instead of deciding exactly what number, we say, well, I'm going to stop at as soon as I'm less than 155. So anything less than 155 will go in this interval. Start at 155, so that would include the exact number 155 up to less than 160. Then from exactly 160 up to less than 165. 165, and so on. And we need to keep going until I've covered off my maximum of 188. So almost there, 180 to less than 185, 185 to less than 190, and I can stop. Okay, so in this case, I've got 8 intervals. That fits okay. All right, and I need to make sure that if I look at the beginning of each interval, they are evenly spaced. They are 5 apart each time. That helps me keep track. Okay, so unlikely you will have to do that, but it is important that you know how in case you have to. Okay, what we tend to do after we have created these intervals, we make a frequency table, much like we did with categorical data. Okay, and we'll do an example on the next page. We then take that frequency table and we turn it into a histogram. Okay, so please note, histograms are different to bar charts. Yes, they both have columns. Yes, they both show us frequencies, but the biggest difference here is there is no space between the columns. They are touching because these numbers represent the same variable rather than very separate, distinct categories. Okay, so that's the biggest thing we're looking for when you're comparing the two. Okay, so let's have a look at this example here. We have some data. We have a frequency table set up for us. Now in this case, we don't have to worry about intervals because it's a very, very small data set with a very small number of options as our answers there, number of counts. Okay, so first thing, I need to fill out my frequency table, and then second thing, I'm going to transfer that to make a histogram. Okay, so first thing, I'm literally counting. For size of family 2, how many respondents said that? And when I count my data here, I can see that there are 2 2s. I count up the number of 3s, I get 7. There are 6 4s, there are 8 5s, and there's 1 6. And so in total, when I add all those numbers up, there are 24. I should always check that my total here in my frequency table, so when I add 2 plus 7 plus 6 plus 8 plus 1, 24, is the same as the number of data points. Because if I've missed one by mistake, that's a way of picking it up. Now I'm going to draw a histogram of this. Okay, so the histogram, we've given you a set of a nice grid to work on. We've labelled the frequency axis, but we haven't labelled the side here. So we make sure we write frequency along the bottom. This is our size of family. And we need to label these numbers. Okay, so we're starting at 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We haven't got 7, but we'll go up to 7. Now in this case, non-grouped data, really important, your column starts and ends halfway through the data value. Okay, so what that means, I'm going to draw the column for family size of 2, which means the number 2 on the scale is going to be in the middle of the column. So I'm going to draw my frequency up to 2, and not a very straight line. Try again. So there is my column for a family size of 2. So the number 2 is in the middle, the column sort of goes either side of it. Okay, and I'm going to continue on. So for 3, I'll take my frequency up to 7. So we need to be really careful and accurate, and you would be using a ruler on your page. Okay, and coming across to complete that column. And again, 3 is in the middle. I'm just shading that in so it's a bit easier to see. All right, and we continue along. So if you're okay with this, you can skip forward a little bit, but I will keep going. So we're going to come across frequency of 6 and down into the middle of 4. There's our column for 4. 5, we said we've got 8. Okay, so we're going to go all the way up to frequency of 8 and coming down nice and straight. Trying to convince myself. Colour that one in. And 6, we had just 1 response there. Okay, so all our columns should be an equal width, same width. The height represents the frequency that you've got in your frequency table. Okay, for continuous data, so here we've got some that has already been split into those intervals. Okay, so you can see everything that is equal to 10 but less than 10.5. We've got 3 occurrences there. And so this was showing time to complete a 100-metre sprint for some people, as 25 people at a sports event. Okay, so again, we're going to write a label for our bottom axis. So that would be our time. And now you might see just here, this little symbol. So that means I've broken the axis. So that means I have not started at 0. So I can start here at that first tick mark at any number I want. And so it makes sense that I'm going to start at 10 because that's the lowest value that I've got here on my frequency table. So I'm going to start my scale at 10, and I should, if I take those major ones there, be able to go up to 14. Okay, the first column, so now that we're looking at an interval, so from 10 to 10.5, so that means my column itself will go from 10 to 10.5 in the middle here. So 10.5 in the middle of 10 and 11. Okay, so I'm going to just put a little dash mark there to remind me, and I need a frequency of 3. So coming across and down. So see how this is different? That now the column actually starts, the left-hand side starts at the left-hand number, and the right-hand side of the column finishes at the right-hand number. So the next one here, so 10.5 to 11, we've got a frequency of 4. So bring that up and across. So finishing at 11, frequency of 4. And then continuing on. So again, if this is something you get, you've got your refresh, you can skip through a little bit. So 11 to 11.5, we've got 6, 11.5 to 12, I'm going up to 7, from 12 to 12.5, I've got a frequency of 3, And then from 12.5 to 13, I've got a frequency of 2. And from 13 to 13.5, a frequency of 1. Okay, so now that's finished. Again, all of those columns are the same width and representing those frequencies in the table there. Okay, I'm going to stop there. The first part of 1C is some additional practice at the frequency tables and the histograms. The second section, which we will go through in class together, is about describing histograms. So that's an important part that we all need to make sure that we've got a good understanding of for Year 12. Okay.